Hi, folks. Ryan Honeyman here from Lift Economy. Many folks have come to us over the last 10 years and asked, how do I get more involved in creating an economy that works for the benefit of all life? They also ask, what skills and experiences do I need to help make this transition? So 3 years ago, we created something called the Next Economy MBA to help address this and similar questions. Lift Economy's Next Economy MBA is an online course that's designed for entrepreneurs, aspiring entrepreneurs, students, recent graduates, employees, and folks who want to learn more about transformational next economy strategies and businesses. Join the growing alumni network of nearly 250 alumni who've gone through this program and learned essential skills and hopefully built lifelong relationships for catalyzing businesses in the emergent and regenerative economy. So we encourage you to check out our course. You can go to lifteconomy.com/MBA. The next course, Cohort 7, starts on September 21st, 2021. So once again, go to www.lifteconomy.com/MBA. And now, on with the show. Welcome to Next Economy Now. The goal of this podcast series is to highlight the leaders who are taking a regenerative, bioregional, equitable, democratic, racially just, and whole systems approach to creating the new economy.
Sarah, welcome to the show.
Ryan, thank you so much for having me.
Sarah, let's start off with a little bit of your background. Where are you from originally?
I was born on the East Coast on the eastern shore of Maryland and grew up in the Hudson Valley of New York State. Spent about a year in India when I was a child, but otherwise had, it was pretty much a typical upbringing in the United States.
Can you describe a little bit the year in India? What was that about?
Sure. My dad and actually my stepmother as well were both professors. And for a year when I was 7 years old, my dad had a Fulbright exchange. So he was teaching at a university there. So our family was living on the campus and going to school every day with kids from the local community. We weren't in one of those foreign enclaves. We were very much a part of the community, studying classical Indian dance, my sister was studying music as well, and just absorbing the culture and learning just how different ways other people live in other parts of the world.
And did you learn any tabla?
I didn't. We learned, as I mentioned, classical Indian dance. So in some respects, the rhythm that you play out with your feet on the floor is echoed by the tabla and vice versa, but I didn't actually ever learn tabla.
Great. You also lived in China in the 1980s, helping them start an English language channel. Just curious, what was living in China in the 80s like?
Well, it sort of depended on where you were. The first year we were actually teaching English, and we were living again on a college campus with the professors from the university. And it was a pretty austere way of life. We were in a very small concrete apartment, 4 stories up. And I remember in the fall, someone knocked on the door and said, "How much cabbage would you like this year?" And the practice was that somebody would show up with a wheelbarrow with many pounds of cabbage, which you would put on your balcony. And that would be your main source of vegetables over the course of the winter. So it was a pretty austere way of life, and it took us a little adjusting and a little work to figure out how to incorporate ourselves. The second year, we were considered foreign experts because I was working for China Central Television on that news program you mentioned. And there they housed us at the Friendship Hotel, and that's a place where foreigners are housed. And the living is far more luxurious. They have a dining hall with good food and people that come in and clean your apartment every day. So it's a very different way of life. But China was very much in the midst of that transition from coming out of the years of the Cultural Revolution and the extreme rule of the Communist Party, coming into what Deng Xiaoping described as opening up to the outside world, which ended up becoming an interesting form of state capitalism where these huge corporations run by the Chinese government became so powerful and inequality really spiked. When we were there, life was fairly simple for a lot of people. They could look in the shop windows and see a small refrigerator and wish for one. But there wasn't the sort of consumerist heaven that I guess there is right now, at least for some people in China. And people found other things to do with their time. They spent a lot of time, grandparents walking with their grandchildren out on the streets and people going to parks and doing Tai Chi early in the morning. And there were sort of other things that one did with one's time rather than the shopping.
When I lived in China in 2006, I remember my wife and I hate McDonald's, and at the same time, we were so excited for American or sort of Western food that we traveled like an hour just to get like McDonald's French fries in this other town, and it was so comforting.
That's very funny. One of my Chinese neighbors went to visit one of the big hotels downtown Beijing to try a hamburger. There were no McDonald's in, but she wanted to try a hamburger. And she came back and reported, I'm not quite sure what all the fuss is about.
Nice. Have you been back to China since you lived there?
No, I haven't. But my daughter, who was born while we lived there, went back and spent a year living there. So I heard reports from her, and I really can't imagine it. I've heard lots of stories, but I just can't quite imagine it. We got around by bicycle a lot of the time, or by bus, and the bike lanes were wide, filled with bicyclists. There were far fewer cars and almost none that were privately owned. And from what I hear now, that it's nothing like that.
And when did you first get interested in journalism? When did you first realize you wanted to start Yes Magazine?
Well, I was working for another magazine called In Context, and I was editing that. The founders decided that they wanted to close it down. And so a number of us who were on the board and the staff decided to spin off a new magazine. So that's when we started Yes, it was 1996. And the reason for it was the sense that even though, in the 90s, a lot of people with Clinton in office and so forth, a lot of people were feeling like, well, things are not so bad. There were some troubling signs on the horizon, but people, especially in the middle class, especially white folks, were saying it's not so bad. And yet we were really concerned about some things like the way that inequality was already then starting to grow at a rapid clip, and the way that the climate crisis was not being recognized. The Limits to Growth book had come out, and there were these very clear reports that said we cannot continue living the way we're living now. There aren't enough planets, there aren't enough natural resources or sinks for all of our waste. When you keep dumping things into the atmosphere, you end up with a climate crisis. When you keep dumping things into the rivers and oceans, you end up with water crises. So, we could see this on the horizon, and we felt like some really good folks were pointing that out, but nobody was really in a rigorous way looking at what the solutions were. So that's what we wanted to do. And we started Yes to tell those stories, not because we thought we could dream up what the solutions were. We weren't quite that arrogant, but because we felt like, if we're seeing this issue, there must be other people who are also, and I wonder what they're doing about it. So those were the stories we looked for, is who's actually taking these questions on and doing so with some vision, some energy, some excitement, some freshness. And what can we learn from them? What can we learn both about the particular innovations, but also what can we learn about what kind of a society people actually want to build when given the choice?
Right, because I feel like a lot of the challenges for folks is this is what we don't want. Like, here's the bad news, as opposed to what does the vision for the future look like? And I think you've really done a great job with that over the years.
Well, thank you. I appreciate that. And, one of the things that I found when I read some of the best books out there on what's happening in our society is that 99% will be a really astute analysis of where things have gone wrong and how dangerous they are. And then at the end, there's this kind of ringing call for action. But that always leaves me really disappointed, because I want more rigor around that question. At a certain point, people get it. They get just how much trouble we're in as a society, and they want to take action. And I think that's especially true with the election of Donald Trump. I think there was a time when a lot of people, again, especially people who were relatively comfortable, and that number has been shrinking, by the way, in the past decades, but people would say, well, the Democratic Party has got it handled, or the Republican Party's got it handled, or the nonprofit, my favorite nonprofit, has got it handled. They're in Washington, D.C. advocating for me. All I need to do is send them a check or click on their petition, and it'll all be okay. And I think one of the things that happened with the election of Donald Trump is a lot of people said, they don't have it handled. And if things are going to get better, it's going to be because I'm going to get directly involved, mostly in my own community. A lot of people are also acting from the power of being from a particular place and calling their member of Congress and saying, I want some action from you. And those things really work. So I think this is a very hopeful moment, seeing how many people are actually getting involved.
Yeah, one of the things I've been thinking about recently, especially with Donald Trump, is this idea of there seems to be a place for activism and action and sort of resistance to negative aspects of his administration. And I'm realizing on a deep level, this sort of otherizing of Trump and his supporters also is not necessarily going to change the system. And so I'm curious, how do you balance this idea of the no energy with also empathy and sort of just electing like a Democratic president and a Democratic House and Democratic Senate isn't going to change the fundamental problems in our country, I don't think. And so I'm curious, how do you really address the tension between those two ideas?
Yeah, I think you've asked two really big questions. I think they're both really important. So one is about othering people, and I did a bunch of work in my own community. I live on an Indian reservation here in Washington State. And when I first moved in, I found that there was this tremendous opposition to the tribe that really got quite hostile and even racist in its tone. And so I did a bunch of work over the years with other people in my community and with the tribe to work on changing that dynamic. And so, my next door neighbors were some of the ones that were involved in that sort of really ugly anti-Indian stuff. I was sort of dealing with that question day by day. On the one hand, feeling very strongly that we needed to live in and express respect for the first people of our country on a daily basis, and politically respect and support their sovereignty. And at the same time, living among people who felt very differently. And one of the things that happened is at the end of this long process in which we won a whole series of victories together with the tribe, the atmosphere didn't get worse, it got better. And I think there are a lot of reasons. At some point, I'd love to actually sit down and do some interviews and analysis of this. But I think one of the reasons is that at every step along the way, even when we took very strong stances, we did so with an ethical foundation and without disrespecting the people who disagreed with us. We didn't call them names. We didn't say, you are a racist or you are this or that. We simply said, I believe that we need to show respect for the first people of this nation. I believe in the Constitution, which says that the treaties with the tribes are the law of the land. I felt like I and the other people that we worked together with could take those strong stands, and in some cases very oppositional stands to those people who had such negative views of the tribe, but do so with so much respect that at the end there wasn't the kind of interpersonal damage, at least created from our side, that made it impossible for us to heal. So that's part of the two questions. The other question I think you were asking was a more structural question, which is that the issues that are besetting us are not just a question of which political party is in office, although that's a huge difference. I don't agree with those who say that the two parties are the same. It is a huge difference. And yet there are deeper issues that I think affect both parties. I think both parties have bought into a political philosophy, some call neoliberalism, which is giving corporations the dominant role in our society, both in terms of the economy and in terms of politics. Yet they're able to call the shots on really key policies, and the power of corporations has been underplayed. If you look at things like the trade deals, or if you look at agricultural policy, or who sets energy policy, in all too many cases, it's large corporations who are setting the agenda in ways that really don't benefit human beings and may, in fact, drive us to our doom if you consider the climate crisis. And unfortunately, neither the Democratic Party as a whole, with the exception of Bernie Sanders and that part of the party, nor the Republican Party, have really been willing to step up to that question.
I'm curious, for Democrats or progressives or liberals, what's your general sense of what needs to happen and then what will probably happen? Curious your thoughts on those things.
Well, I think what needs to happen is the kind of rigor that people like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren bring to the debate, which is to really get real about what it's going to take to shift the economy from being oriented to benefit the 1% and large corporations in Wall Street to what it will really mean if ordinary people are going to be okay and prosper. I don't think the corporate wing of the Democratic Party has been very genuine about really looking at those questions. They've been looking a lot at the questions of how do you win, and doing that poorly, I think. I think Americans are now kind of hip to the lack of authenticity in that message. I don't think they've been looking with rigor at what it's actually going to take to have our economy and our way of life be oriented towards what will benefit those of us alive now, but also future generations. What it will take, I think, is going to be really a recasting of the Democratic Party from the bottom up. I'm going to be attending the People's Summit in Chicago, and I think those kinds of efforts, bringing together people like Bernie Sanders and folks from the Nurses Union and people like Nina Turner, some really wonderful leaders who have had the courage to talk about those issues. I think that's a good step, but I think really it needs to happen in Democratic parties all over the country at the grassroots level. And then that grassroots needs to insist that the national level be responsive to that.
I love this idea of reviving the grassroots. So if we play this out a little bit as a hypothetical, like let's say Bernie wins, if he decides to run again, What happens to the folks who are the sort of other 45% of the country who are, don't agree with his policies? I kind of feel like Obama was great, and not to say that Obama and Bernie are similar, but it sort of feels like the person in the White House, whether it's Bernie or Obama or Hillary, it's maybe very incremental change. So I guess I'm sort of coming back to what are some of the more fundamental changes that you think need to happen? Is it possible for someone like Bernie to really turn the ship around?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I don't think any national leader can do it by themselves. They'll just get hammered by the powers that be. So it has to be a shift in power that pervades the whole society. And that has to be founded in communities all over the country. It has to be founded in the grassroots. So we can be doing that now, and I think people are doing that now, in fact, probably more vigorously than ever because of how alarmed they are. And regardless of who's president, that's going to help create the political space for good things to happen and prevent some of the worst things from happening. One of my assessments of the first part of the Trump presidency is that the resistance has been extremely effective, much more effective than I had feared.
So Sarah, tell us about your new book, The Revolution Where You Live. It's funny, when I first heard that you wrote this book, I immediately thought of John Steinbeck's Travels with Charlie, how you had got the best possible book gig to travel around and write a book about it. Can you tell us a little bit about the origins of the story, of how this project came about, and what some of the things you hope to find were?
Sure. So this was at the end of 2015 that I took this trip, and I've been looking forward to the 20th anniversary of starting Yes, and really thinking about that question that I mentioned earlier about where are the solutions coming from? Because the things that we started out worried about were all getting worse, even though there were good solutions that we and others had been writing about. The climate change is rolling out much more quickly than scientists had feared. There are sort of worst case scenarios in many of those models or what's in fact playing out. We're already seeing the effects of that. And it really could be quite dire for where not only the next generation goes, but where even the way of life of a lot of people today. So that was one question that was bugging me. And a second was inequality. There's now something like 20 people who have more wealth than the entire half of the entire population of the United States. So inequality is getting worse. Most of the benefits of the growth of the economy and the growth in productivity are all going to the top 1%. And the middle class is really under strain. So that was the second question. The third was around racism, because I think a lot of people hoped that having elected an African-American president, we could put the chapter of racial exclusion and violence against people of color, we could put all that behind us and say, we're a multicultural, post-racial society now. And of course, that's not the case. It takes far more work than that to actually achieve that status and to deal with the trauma of centuries of violence against people of color. With that in mind, I thought, where are the solutions? Am I looking in the right places? Are there places I haven't explored yet that I need to understand better? So I decided to go to places that I don't normally go to spend more time in the Rust Belt. I spent some time there, spend time in the Mountain West and in the South and in Appalachia, and stay away from the coast and stay away from the places where people are, rewarded by the status quo for being willing to accept the status quo. What about the people who've been so left out for so long? Maybe they're the ones that have some solutions that I should be looking into. So I made the decision to take the road trip, and then I decided, well, while I'm doing this, I really should write about it, both write for Yes Magazine, but also write a book. And at that point, I approached Barrett Kohler about doing a book project with him.
I'm curious, on your trips, especially in Appalachia and the Rust Belt, did you see Trump's election coming sooner than others, or was it still a surprise to you?
It was still a surprise, in part because I spent a lot of time when I got back looking at polling, and the polling seemed to suggest that Hillary Clinton was going to win, although the polling also was pretty clear that Bernie Sanders had a better shot at beating Trump than Hillary Clinton did. That was an interesting part of the polling as well. So I was surprised because I had been paying attention to that. But when I thought back on the conditions that I saw when I was traveling around major parts of the country, I remember at one point just thinking, I'm seeing town after town, city after city that really look just on their way down. And the exceptions to that are rare. The exceptions where there's a small town that isn't boarded up, where the downtown seems to be alive, or a city neighborhood where there's a vibrant, neighborhood shopping district and where the housing seems in good condition. Those seem to be far rarer than I thought they were going to be. And when I thought about that and about how long many of those communities have been in real economic stress, whether it's African American communities in Cincinnati, Ohio, or Cleveland, or whether it's the small towns in the Rust Belt. It's just been a long time. And certainly the data on the increase rate of death among white folks is a sign that, because of alcoholism and suicide and addiction and so forth, people are really in despair. And it just made me think, okay, maybe a lot of people recognize that Trump is not really that capable, but he's promising to be a champion for their side. And after feeling so disempowered and so disrespected by folks like Hillary Clinton, they were willing to just take a chance at it.
Right. And I'm curious, are there 2 or 3 solutions that you were particularly excited about that you found on your trip?
Well, I think the thing I was excited about was the sense that across the board, there's way more power in our communities than we might have thought. So, for example, I visited several communities, Greensboro, North Carolina, Ithaca, New York, where people were really taking on the question of racism in a really rigorous way and making some inroads. It's not a question that can be turned around right away, but they were consciously moving down that path. I found other places that were working on a new economy, both through building cooperatives and networks of cooperatives, but also through informal means of creating more ties between people so that there can be swaps and there can be time banking and other ways in which people can just help each other out and not be so reliant on the cash economy. And I found that people could actually take on the climate crisis. And that was in some ways the most surprising, because I think we think of climate change as, since it's a global issue, it will take big global agreements and enforcement. And as much as I think those are important, it turns out that there are local communities who are stopping huge coal mines. One place I visited in Montana, where the native people and the ranchers together were able to stop this coal mine that would have dug up 1.2 billion tons of coal and shipped it to Asia, where people there would have been getting sicker from the smoke and people all over the world would have been suffering from the addition to the climate crisis. So on all counts, I've found that people are able to do things in their local community that are important for them, but also important for the kind of a society that we all want to live in.
I'm curious if there were any preconditions that you found in resilient communities that maybe were absent in the communities that were boarded up and didn't have that same vibrancy? Did you find any sort of similar traits amongst the more resilient and sort of empowered communities?
Well, one thing I wrote about recently in my column for Yes Magazine is about the rural communities, some of the rural communities that I encountered that seemed to be doing well, and especially found that communities that had a very active Amish population were often doing well. And it got me thinking about what it means to do small scale farming, because right now the corporate agriculture model is to have as few people as possible on the land and to use instead these huge machines and huge amounts of chemicals and fertilizers and pesticides to raise the crops. And so that means that, there aren't the jobs because you don't need people. You just need a few people to run a few machines. And then, of course, there's the problem of Walmart's coming in and driving out the local businesses by lowering their prices so much because they're able to drive down working conditions and wages all over the world. And then oftentimes the Walmart simply picks up and leaves, and then people have to rely on a super Walmart that may be many miles away. So their entire commercial center is gone. But I was really struck by those small communities that had Amish farming going on. And I visited Organic Valley, which is a co-op of small farmers. It's one of the largest wholesalers of organic dairy products in the country. It's got over $1 billion in sales of organic dairy products. But the purchases come from small and medium-sized organic farms. And part of their whole business model is, because the farmers own the co-op, is that the first thing they do is make sure the farmers get paid enough that they can grow, that they can raise their cattle and get the milk without any harm to the environment or to the cattle or to the farmers and the farm workers. So when you set the price there, then we consumers end up paying a bit more for those products. But compared to the damage that's being done to our rivers and air and so forth by industrial agriculture, I think it's a really interesting model to look at.
You also mentioned something around your excitement around the commons. Can you talk a little bit about some of the progressive action you've seen that's inspiring to you around that topic?
Sure. Yeah, I just got back from my book tour, and the last part of the book tour was in Germany. And I had a chance to visit in Berlin, to visit a large park. It's sort of like Central Park is to New York, but it's very close to where the Berlin Wall came down. So it was a big, neglected piece of land, and the city wanted to build a freeway through that. And the owner, which was the East German Railroad Company, wanted to sell it to developers and make as much money as possible. But the local community, the neighborhoods, the people who'd been using some of that land for small farming, gardening allotments, they formed a citizens movement and were able to get that huge piece of land protected as a park. So I had a chance to explore that park with one of the activists who helped to do that. And I was just struck again by how important those spaces are, those spaces where we can gather, the places we can be outside, even in a city where we can be growing food and flowers. And nearby this community gardening space was an old shipping container somebody had turned into a cafe, and they were selling coffee and cold drinks and pastries, and people were pulling up tables and chairs and these beautifully hand-painted, quirky inventions for tables and chairs, and gathering and enjoying themselves out in the spring morning. And I just started thinking about how much I'd seen in Germany of people just gathering in public spaces like that, whether it was in sidewalk cafes or in beer gardens or the center squares of cities everywhere I visited. And I started thinking about how much in the United States, how isolated people are. They spend so much time. We spend so much time behind our computers or watching television or commuting to work and back, that time to simply enjoy being outside with our neighbors, that's become increasingly rare. And in fact, the data shows that the number of people that any individual says they can trust has been shrinking over the past decades, that people are getting more isolated, and that isolation is as toxic to our health as smoking cigarettes. It is something that increases the death rate. And so it's an incredibly important part of our well-being, is linking up with our neighbors, getting to know other people in our community. And these common spaces are absolutely essential for making that possible.
I'm curious, on a personal or professional level, what are you most excited about right now in life?
Oh, what I'm most excited about right now is that all these conclusions I came to from this trip about how powerful our communities have become or could become. I'm working on starting another project which is based on that idea, which is that as I was looking at these projects, I was thinking, these are wonderful. And what if there were a lot more of them? What's holding people back? And the two things I thought about were, one is, of course, is that people are busy and they're just trying to make ends meet and get to work and back and so forth. But there were another couple of things, which is that I think people have experiences oftentimes in their communities where they've come out to a meeting or something and it's been ineffective or dull, or somebody has dominated the meeting, or there's been a conflict and they don't know how to deal with it, and they go home and say, I'm never going to do this again. And so I started thinking, there's a lot of skills to having really powerful communities, really empowered communities. And those skills aren't ones we're born with. We don't know when we're born how to facilitate a good meeting, but they're also not rocket science. It doesn't take getting an MBA to know how to do that. So I started thinking about creating an online school so that some of the people that I met on this journey, and lots of other people who've learned how to do this well, can share what they've learned with people in other communities around the country who may want to do the same thing. So I've gotten very excited about this. I've got a bunch of people that are now working on this with me. We haven't launched yet. We don't have a name for it yet, but I've started talking about it on my blog, Revolution Where You Live. And people are signing up for our email list and looking at how they can get involved in either teaching or taking classes from one another. Because it'll be online, it'll make it very inexpensive. So I'm hoping these skills can spread quickly across the country, and that sense of empowerment and that sense of capability that people need to be able to move forward, that can spread rapidly. And because we're really going to be looking at how to get people to take the courses together where they live, I'm hoping that will help bring people together and break out of that isolation. And as they learn the skills, they can turn to each other and say, okay, we're the ones that are going to make this happen. I
really love that idea. I think one of the challenges we've seen at Lyft Economy in our own work is we're not taught collective decision making. It's one of the reasons maybe co-ops don't do as well as they could, or there's not more co-ops. Like you said, simple meeting facilitation, like having people eventually come to a proposal. I propose that X happens. And so I'm super excited that you're working on this. I think it's a huge need.
Thank you. Yeah. And as I said, we don't have a name for it yet, but on my website, revolutionwhereyoulive.org, one of the verticals is devoted to a conversation about this.
What is the book, besides your own, that you most often give as a gift?
Well, I think that changes day to day and person to person. I don't think there is one. I mean, one thing is that the people that I know and love tend to be people who are very busy and have their own interests. So I don't want to impose on them what I happen to be reading at the moment. But people that I love reading are people like Wendell Berry, people like W.S. Merwin. I guess those would be the two that I would think of offhand.
I'm also curious if there's a sort of a brain teaser question is, what do people never ask you that you wish they did?
One of the questions I was asked a lot on my book tour was from people who said, I get it. I can't outsource my activism. I've got to get involved, but I don't know where to start. And another question I got a lot was, I really know I really want to talk to people in my family or my friends or my neighbors who voted for Trump, but I don't even know how to start the conversation. So I was really struck by those two questions, that there's just this enormous hunger for taking that next step, and also a lot of fear about it, about what does it mean to actually do that. Well, the question about how to get involved, what I said was to start with something that you personally care a lot about. So start with your own heart, because that's where a lot of the energy is going to come from, is your own compassion and caring. And find at least two other people who share that with you, who care about that same thing. And sometimes there's already an organization in your community that's working on it, then it's fine, you can just join up with them. But if there's not, find at least two other people who care about the same thing you care about, and start getting together, even if it's just for coffee, and just talking about why you care about it, and then start learning from each other and from your community. What's going on in your community that relates to that thing that you care about? And little by little, it'll become clear to you what needs to happen. And the book is called The Revolution Where You Live. And so much about the revolution is really got to be, not only the power needs to come from the bottom up, from the grassroots communities, but the ideas of what has to happen, what needs to change, how does our culture evolve? How does our society become something different? That has to be bottom up too. So it's really important to me as I think about this school that we not be one of the organizations that is telling people, okay, here's our agenda. We're all going to advocate for X and Y. Even though I think that work is really important right now for resisting the Trump revolution, I think it's also just really important for each community to look at itself and say, what needs to happen right here? For example, where I live, there's a Hispanic community that most of the white folks in town don't relate to, don't know who they are, don't know their stories. And so when I look at my community, I say, you know what, one of the things we need to do is we need to get to know each other better. We need to make sure that folks are feeling safe here, people who may be undocumented. So that's the first part. The second thing, how do I speak to my friends or family members who voted for Trump? I think that a lot of people who I was talking to and a lot of people who were Democratic Party supporters tend to bring out the facts and figures and the research and use that as a means to have that conversation. And I think sometimes people feel like they're being bludgeoned by somebody who may be better educated than them or may have better access to information, or they just may feel is trying to be superior. And I think we need to shift the tone of the conversation instead of to winning, to understanding. And we can start by doing that with our own values and the things that we care passionately about. So we can say, I'm terrified of what's happening to the climate. I don't want to see our community turned into a flooded or a drought-stricken, and I don't want to see the kinds of wars that come out of a world in which the agricultural system is upended by the climate crisis. So I'm really worried about this. Or you can say, I really don't want to live in a country that's divided along lines of race. I want to get to know people who are different than me, and I want them to feel completely included in the community. So you can draw on your own experiences, the things that you're passionate about, and then listen to what the other person cares about and what they're passionate about. And I think oftentimes we find that the real divides are not these sort of simplistic right-left divides that the mainstream media keeps trotting out. And that's one of the reasons why people who voted for Obama later voted for Trump. It's not the simple binary that the media tends to put out there. And so we may find that we have common ground on some really important issues with some people who voted for Trump. And then we may find that we have some really important differences, and we can keep on working on those differences and see if there's a way to reach more understanding.
Yeah, one of the best tools I've been trying to use in those conversations is nonviolent communication. So exactly. For folks who don't know Marshall Rosenberg, check out the book Nonviolent Communication. Good tools for those Trump conversations.
That's right. And one of his big insights is you start by using the I word. You say, this is how I feel, or how I am affected, or where I'm passionate. And then you listen for what the other person's passions are. It's a very simple technique, but not one that we're used to using.
Yeah, and I love that he makes you reflect back. You have to say back what the other person said, because so many times we're thinking of what to say next as opposed to listening.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious about, we mentioned a few folk. Who else are you watching and who else is inspiring you?
Well, the group of people that are inspiring me a lot are the indigenous folks who are stepping up to a kind of leadership that goes beyond leadership in their own communities and is actually starting to be heard. I think a number of them were actually speaking about this for years, but is starting to really be heard. I spent some time out at the Standing Rock protection efforts, and I think that sometimes the language seems very simple and therefore seems like something maybe people already know, but if you listen really carefully to the things that they're talking about making decisions with the next generations in mind, about just the notion that water is life, that sounds so simple, and yet it's something that we're violating constantly by polluting water and not taking seriously how much we need water to be clean in order for us to be healthy. So I'm really inspired by the indigenous leadership that I'm seeing, and I think there's a lot of wisdom and there's a lot of strategic smarts. I'm really looking forward to the climate march. I think the role of the Indigenous Environmental Network is really important in Honor the Earth, and I think they're doing that local work of stopping different really destructive pipeline projects and fossil fuel projects that is part of dealing with the climate crisis.
And how can listeners support your work? Is there anything you need right now to help you either on the Yes Magazine or on the book side or other events? How can folks get more involved and help support your work?
Well, they can go to my website, revolutionwhereyoulive.org, and sign up to be on my email list. And then they will be hearing from me as this school project begins to develop. So that's, as I said, that's the thing that I'm really excited about right now. If you go to the website and read the part about the school, there's also a form you can fill out that gives your opinion about some of the questions we're dealing with as we begin developing it, and also ask the question, are you interested in helping? And so there's several different check boxes people can check if they're interested in getting more involved. So that's what I would say is revolutionwhereyoulive.org.
Next Economy Now is a production of Lift Economy. To listen to all of our episodes, go to lifteconomy.com/podcast. That's LIFT economy.com/podcast. You can also sign up for our monthly newsletter at lifteconomy.com/newsletter. Please also rate and review our podcast on iTunes, Spotify, Stitcher, or wherever you get your podcasts. Thanks for listening.